Welcome to Managing Love Intelligently. I'm Jason.
And I'm Stephen Ng. I give you my full last name because I'm not going incognito like Jason.
Yeah, they don't need to know who I am. Just Jason. And Steve is a licensed marriage and family therapist with over 30 years experience. And I am a man with no last name.
And actually, it's about 35 years experience.
35 now? I'm going to update.
I'm getting older by the minute, yeah.
It's even better. You just got 5 more years, listeners. So how this works is I present a topic to Steve, which I planned ahead of time, but Steve has no idea about, and we talk about it for an hour or so. And today's topic is mate selection.
Ooh, good topic.
Yeah, something we've touched on in different episodes, but never actually devoted a full episode to it.
I end up talking about it every day in my practice, so it's
great.
Kind of cool we're talking about this.
Nice. So
I know it sounds kind of like bizarrely scientific, right?
Yeah, I told a girl, she's like a friend of mine, which we'll get into later.
Okay. So that came up, how weird the term is.
She's like, mate selection. It should be like how to find love or something. It's just like, but I kind of like mate selection because it's like you remember it, I feel like.
Oh, you find it memorable. That's good to know. I think my clients get desensitized to it because, of course, I'm grooming them into thinking this way. But for me, it's a little more objectifying the whole process and making it less mystical and romantic and more thoughtful.
Yeah, but some people, I think the women though want the more mystical and romantic sometimes. Yeah,
I think. And men who are trying desperately to please women, I'm sure, feel the same way. But, I think it's just such a, I don't know, I find it helpful to think about it that way because it's not just that I'm shopping for a girlfriend or I'm looking, to meet someone interesting. It's, most of us kind of play it out in our mind as if we're hoping to end up someday with a significant other in our life with whom we can share our years going forward. Mm-hmm. And mate selection seems to be, it's also a product of all the books I read, from scientific literature. They're which are mostly, the ones I'm reading are mostly about evolutionary anthropology and what's going on with human beings from an evolutionary point of view. And it's mate selection from, say, Darwin's perspective is a pretty intriguing scientific investigation. So that's how I ended up with that term.
Cool. Well, yeah, I like it. So yeah, we'll talk about what it is, how to do it, why it's important, get into all that stuff. But first, I thought we could travel back in time to when Stephen Ng was a young man and and talk about how you selected your partners, because we've talked about this before in some podcasts, and I think me and you had the same sort of criteria.
So this is one in a series of exercises in humiliation and debasement of self as we look at my foibles of the past. Sure, yeah, that's just so pleasant. Let's do this one more time.
But it's relatable because I have the same story that you have, and I think then that would mean other men are the same.
Well, you mean you think it's just the two of us? You think other people also?
Unless we were just the two neediest guys around, and
well, we do podcasts, so yeah, that could be part. My own experience is that as important as we all think mate selection is, or the construction of a family, or finding and building a truly intimate relationship, whatever our language is, virtually none of us get any kind of help or education along the way. And so we're all left to reinvent the wheel or rediscover the gift of fire, and for ourselves. And it seems then because of that, it is a necessity that we make egregious errors along the way. And the mistakes that we make, some of us choose to live with those mistakes for the rest of our lives. But more and more, Americans at least, are discovering there is a remedy, and the remedy is divorce. And I'm kind of relieved about that because so much of the stigma around divorce has been lifted as we become less and less religious. We become more and more humble with, I think, at least this is how I choose to look at it, with admitting to ourselves, oops, I really made a big mistake. I need to fix this.
Yeah. But then, yeah, so you're saying we didn't have education or anything like that. So then when you're young, we're not being taught really much anything as far as selecting partners. So then how did you select partners when you were younger?
With the same kind of ignorance and emotional neediness most people do.
Yeah.
First of all, I knew nothing. And yeah, we have talked about this before, because I remember saying something like, as long as I found her attractive and she was willing to be seen with me in public, game on.
Yeah, and that's it. And that's
pretty much it. That's
what mine was too.
So that was Google 1.0 in my brain. The love Google, and now things are a bit more complex, but thankfully not so complex that I don't think everyone listening to this can't understand it.
But why is that problematic? That it's like, well, I find her attractive and she seems to like me. I like her. What's your deal, Steve?
Well, what's the problem? What could possibly go wrong with all of that attraction? Well, the problem is there are all these other variables that are truly significant, like, is he or she emotionally abusive? Forgetting about for a moment about physical abuse, because we haven't evaluated for that either. We just assume or presume that because it's nice now, it'll always be kind and loving in the future. And that is a terrible presumption, because there's really no foundation for that presumption. The same thing with just a host of other potentially fatal consequences, fatal to the relationship success, that is.
And then so when we talk about mate selection, how are people, like, we talk about the intentional interview and asking questions, like, I mean, I guess I'm going to edit some of this out. So with mate selection, what are people experiencing in your office, or what are you telling them about it?
Well, I'm married, so I'm like unavailable. Yes. That's what I'm telling them.
But are they like having trouble with it? Are they?
Oh, everybody's having trouble with this because nobody's been informed of any of it. So, and what's funny is, I guess there's this irrational belief that because I'm good at my profession, or I'm good at so many other things in life, like everything from cooking to working on cars to my job at work, because I'm good at these things and I'm highly intelligent, then of course something as easy as falling in love and finding the right person, that's just a given. I won't need to, it's nothing to really consider thoughtfully. Certainly not something that I need any training in, because if I needed training, I would have received it from my school, from my parents, or from my church. Or certainly from the military when I was in there. And the truth is, none of these places, none of these people really teach us anything about mate selection, because, well, the dirty little secret is they don't know either. So nobody knows and nobody's talking about it. And yet it's kind of mission critical, because it directs where you'd be hanging out, what kind of target population or demographic that you would be trying to get to know, what signs to look for. I was just speaking the other day to a very wonderful client, and she's been through some really terrible, hurtful relationships. And she said to me how much she'd gotten out of counseling so far. And she makes a point of asking men, do you drink? And I cringed inside, because she's a streetwise, intelligent woman with a good heart. And unfortunately, that's a terrible approach to finding out anything about somebody's drinking or drug habits. And I told her so. And I said, if you really want to know, you would probably go with something more like, do you like to party? Something flirty and friendly. And she said, well, that sounds like something a hooker would say. And I said, yeah, like, let's party, and the guy who really doesn't use drugs, he's going to say something. And the guy who does is going to be intrigued and think, game on, girlfriend. I mean, this is going to be fun. So she said, oh, you're right. I would get more honest answers if I posed it in that friendly sort of way than if now that involves, yes, some level of trickery, but the whole point is you want to make these interviews friendly and engaging and fun for both of you. And so if he did say something like, well, hell yeah, I like to, do some lines once in a while, or, well, if you're down, I am, which is not the answer she's looking for. Okay. She then gets to respond with, oh yeah, do you like to follow it up with drinking? Because I'm curious what your favorite drink is. And if he says, well, on the weekends I mostly go for beer, but Friday night for me it's straight shots. And and this is a woman who's looking for a guy who doesn't drink at all.
Okay.
Yeah, and so then she gets to say, and again in a friendly and flirty way, she goes, I'm probably not the right woman for you. And knowing in her own heart that that's absolutely true. And yet he's still thinking, wait a minute, I think we could make this work out. Yeah. And because what do you like to drink? And she said, I don't drink. Oh, yeah. Well, how do you like to party? Well, quietly with good friends and soft music. And, and that's not what he was thinking at all. And so what's really terrific about that sort of intentional interview ultimately is that it's friendly and meaningful for both people, because both people get to find out the same answers and the same truth, that we are really compatible or we are not really compatible. And that's a gift for everybody. It may be mildly disappointing, especially for the really critically needy, who are so desperate for a relationship. I mean, any relationship. But for the thoughtful person, I don't want to be with someone who is 180 degrees the opposite of me on things where I need more compatibility.
Yeah. And this is something, though, mate selection, when we talk about it, it's about finding more of a long-term partner, or is it even apply to short-term, or a little bit of both?
Well, maybe a little bit of both. I guess I could fudge my answer that way. But, just because somebody out there isn't suitable material for a long-term committed relationship doesn't mean they're not fun to date. So, if I enjoy going skiing, let's say, with somebody, that doesn't mean she needs to be the kind of girl I would take home to meet mother and want to live happily ever after with. She just might be really a fun and engaging person with a great sense of humor. She's the life of the party. It's just, I want to leave the party at some point and go home to my quiet little bookish ways as an introvert and get away from all that. So I don't want to bring all that crazy with me.
Then you mentioned, where you're even thinking about with mate selection, where people hang out. So that's a big thing. So that's one of the...
Well, if I don't like to drink and I don't want a partner who drinks, hanging out in a nightclub where everybody's drinking
would not be...
Probably not the greatest solution. And I say this in terms of playing the probabilities of life. If you're interested in someone who doesn't drink, you possibly could meet them anywhere. You might meet them at a big party because they'd be the person sipping water or holding a drink but not drinking, or even taking a sip out of one drink for an hour or longer, chasing it with glasses of water. But typically, I think it would make more sense for an outdoorsy kind of person who is looking for similarly minded people to hang out with a group that goes outdoors, like the Sierra Club or the Audubon Society or something like that. And if you're really into reading and books and you love literature, a book club would be a more appropriate venue, right? Because even if all of the people in my book club are not interesting to me in terms of, potential mates, even if they're all married for that matter, making their acquaintance is going to open up a world of their acquaintances. And the fact that I'm letting these other people get to know me informs them when they're talking to people in their life. Oh, and they say, you should meet this guy from my book club. He's really like what you're talking about.
Yeah.
So that's why I think the demographic is really important. And as long as we're talking about venues, I would say, and not a venue like the grocery store or the laundromat, because all I have in common basically is the fact that I like clean clothes and food. But who doesn't like clean clothes and food?
Yeah.
So, and then of course there's that old standby. So many people use the venue for religious exercises, whether it's church or the synagogue or the mosque. And I think, I honestly think going to spiritual venues is pretty awful as a place to meet others, potential mates, because generally when you go to one of those venues, people are on their best and trying to appear as positive and really not feeling safe enough to simply be who they are. And let's face it, is, whether you like religion or you don't, like I don't, but if you like religion, you have to admit, well, people are going because they have some level of brokenness on the inside and they're looking for answers. And there's nothing wrong with being broken or looking for answers, but then, does that church or does that religion really have any answers worth receiving? And again, possible, but in my view, not probable.
Yeah. Would you even put that over to like spiritual things, like spiritual gatherings where they're not organized?
Like a crystal convention, or some kind of a metaphysical gathering of
like a drum circle or something, or like some sort of like event like that.
Well, you'll meet those people who, share those kinds of interests. For me, they're not, I guess they're so off-putting. It's a little bit like meeting somebody at a white power convention. It's just, it's not what I'm looking for. It's not something that would work for me, but, and I question whether it's that helpful. I think the idea that, say in my relationship, my wife really likes, some of the things that are considered rather new age. For example, she plays with astrology just recreationally, but she's genuinely interested in tarot. I'm not genuinely interested in tarot, but I have to admit, I do find it intriguing because it's a little bit like those old-fashioned Rorschach ink blots in that one can project a lot of one's own thinking into the experience of pulling cards and looking at the meaning and how they would impact your life. Whereas astrology and crystals and just all the other things that go with that whole world don't really work for me. But perhaps because that's, I'm the kind of person who's more in my head, and I would have probably a better experience just going to virtually any kind of science conference or conference of psychotherapists or something like that.
Yeah.
I would probably have a better experience there.
So it's about the person kind of figuring out like who they are, what they're about, and where they want to go.
You really said it just the way I meant it. Unfortunately, I sounded very snobbish.
I don't like people who do crystals or drum circles. I'm a man of the mind.
Yeah, and that that's sort of true. But for me, I mean, it could also. I love horses and horseback riding. I love
horses
dogs.
are just as mystical as crystals. That's what I heard.
Yes, they're exactly the same as crystals, except they move and they have feelings. And I like gardens, and people who like gardens just seem exceptionally fun to me. So again, it's really customizing your search to you instead of the one same answer for everybody. Like, you need to go to church so you can meet a good person.
Yeah.
That's not really very helpful.
Yeah, that's a good way of looking at it. And like for me, and I know like you in general, you say bars aren't the best place for
generally not. And yet even at a bar or even at a grocery store or for God's sakes, even in a parking lot, you might fortuitously meet somebody who's fantastic and just right for you. It's just that the odds don't favor it.
Yeah.
So, you have to think a little bit about that. Now, I say that because, the competition for a lot of the ideas I'm promoting is to go online and find a social dating app of some kind.
Yeah.
And I just feel so awful about the odds of that being successful that I would rather take my chances at a random cocktail party or a museum opening or some kind of art opening at, a gallery. I think I'd have a better shot than just going randomly through the offerings of a social networking site.
Yeah. Well, the thing about, because the thing that's nice about the social networking is because everyone, and I'm still not on it. I'm still not on it.
So sorry, ladies.
Yeah. But I've been on them, but I'm taking a break still. But the one good thing is that it shows who's single and who's not. I mean, that's what you everyone there is single and looking. But when you go to, like, say, an art show, you don't really know. So you're kind of going there, though.
You kind of do, though, at a glance.
You could, all right. Yeah. Tell us about this.
Oh, well, because just like the Audubon Society promotes the banding of birds, we promote in our society the banding of married people.
Okay.
So
there.
They usually have a wedding ring on,
okay.
And when you see the wedding ring, it's like, okay, back off, you crazy dude.
Yeah.
It's like, or dial up the friendship and dial down the sexuality, dial up the friendliness and the intellectual interest and the conversation, because one woman you meet isn't truly available doesn't mean she's not going to be a future great source of referrals.
Yeah.
Because a woman you find attractive at a museum and she with her married girlfriend are looking at some paintings that you admire, and you are eventually in the position where a conversation spontaneously and naturally grows out of that. When they realize, oh, he's not hitting on us, he's just an interesting, intelligent man. And then when you walk your way and they walk their way, and then maybe you run into each other again, it would be perfectly normal for them to say, hey, do you come here often? Because I have a girlfriend who likes to come here and she's always by herself. Yeah. Would you mind if I gave her your number? Or things like that happen all the time in life because, well, meeting wonderful people is wonderful. And just because I may not be available doesn't mean I wouldn't want to introduce her to some guy I know who would be really appropriate in my mind.
Yeah. So if you're at, say, some art opening and you're checking out the fingers, seeing if there's a ring on the finger or not.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. So
and maybe you're like, okay, there's some women over there. They don't have rings on.
They're not banded. Yeah.
I'm going to go, and then you just kind of go have a conversation with them.
Well, you don't want to be that creep, right? Who's just coming up and kind of ingratiating yourself in a private moment between two friends. But if you were to naturally strike up, I mean, first of all, you have to have a natural conversation strike up, you have to be in the venue.
Yeah.
And you have to be with the right people
to
have the kind of outcome I'm talking about. And for most of us, we need, when we're talking to a stranger, it's just so helpful to have that third thing. And that's why we have all those cartoons and stories about men and women taking puppies to a park, because the puppy represents that third thing. And people get to say, oh, what kind of a good puppy do you have? How long have you had him? And all those kinds of questions. And it becomes very organic. The conversation is very organic, very natural, and non-threatening in my experience.
Yeah, when I see guys with dogs now and I take a walk, I'm like, yeah, I know what you're doing. I know exactly what you're doing.
You're a predator. You've just baited the trap.
Yeah.
Right. So, but it's the same thing with any third thing. If you're at a car show with a car, if you're at a museum or a art gallery and with the art, And I think the same is true. I would just got to put a plug in for one of my favorite activities, going to the opera, because most women know they want to dress nicely for the opera, and some women really put on the show. I mean, the smoke show is happening. And so
I know you've mentioned this before.
Well, yeah,
I got to go to the opera.
Yeah, well, you'd have to like develop an actual interest in opera or some humility to admit, well, actually, this is my first opera. I don't know what to think about it. But typically there's always a longer intermission between acts, between 1 and 2, and it'll be like 30 minutes long or longer. Mm-hmm. And that is really a long time for people to go get drinks and refreshments and to have a chat. And I can't tell you, my wife and I, when we met, we were delighted to discover a mutual love in opera before we ever dated. And our first date was going to an opera, and we had a great time. But then she told me about all the times she's been dressed to the nines at an opera, standing by herself, single guy after single guy walking by, without the social skills to simply approach her quite naturally and say, "Hey, are you enjoying tonight's opera?"
Yeah.
And she wasn't wearing a wedding ring, and she was all by herself, and she was dressed beautifully. And why would you hesitate to go up and talk to her? Yeah. I mean, if you need to pregame by having a couple shots first, you can do that before the opera. Maybe that would get you through, maybe 3 shots. But I think when I go to the opera with her, I just see, again, individuals and groups of women who love the arts, who love opera, and they're standing around really looking very open and amenable to having a conversation.
Yeah. This is why I need to go. I am interested. I'm not like a aficionado of the opera, but I do like the arts and the performance arts, and I'd never been to one. It is something that is interesting. So,
well, there's a science to learning about opera, but mostly it just starts with actually going and then developing an interest, reading a few articles, and learning about the opera you're going to. And the more you do it, the more you'll appreciate it. It's like, for somebody like you, going to an opera it would be like somebody going to their first baseball game, not knowing the rules. And so you would want to know a little something maybe that would enhance your enjoyment. But it's the same is true of everything. Now, I have a lot of people in my life who love drag racing, and they will go down to different venues that the names of which I cannot even remember. And they're telling me with stars in their eyes, they're getting all dewy, talking about how wonderful it is to feel the ground vibrate underneath them as these engines are slowly destroying the hearing of everyone in the vicinity. And for them, that's a magic venue. Yeah. And I encourage them to keep going, because they're going to meet the kind of women who share their love of fine motor vehicles without mufflers. Yeah. And I think that for me, that's a very effective way of meeting people. And the same with any kind of activity, whether it's, getting into a golf club or going to an organized sport event, anything like that. But then you got to bring some game with you. And I don't mean just some BS, but one of the most despised social skills out there is the ability to make small talk. And I've said this before on this podcast, and I'll say it again, that instead of swiping left or right or reading the little tiny bios that go with social networking on dating apps, I think it's 5 minutes of a conversation with someone tells you so much more than you could ever learn from a few text exchanges and a bio.
Well, I think like you said with the opera, like if the woman's there, "Hi, how are you enjoying tonight's opera?" Like just saying something that simple is all you really need to say. Like even if I said that and I would be like, "Oh yeah, it's interesting. This is my first time I've been around theater for a long time." I could then go into my own background of being in the arts.
Well, give her a chance to talk back to you.
She's just going to listen to everything that I
say. For 30
But
minutes.
no, I would, of course, I would have an exchange that
But a lot of people, I'm
mutual.
pulling your leg, of course, but a lot of people don't know how to engage in small talk, and then because they don't know why it's so valuable, they look down their nose at it and disdain it. But in 5 minutes of small talk, you can find out if someone's friendly or not.
Yeah.
You can find out if they are comfortable within their own skin or not. You can often find out if they have a sense of humor, if they're open to meeting you. And these are big questions. Typically, you also find out what they do for a living and how long they've been engaged in the activity, like going to an opera.
Yeah.
And also why it is they're here alone.
Yeah.
And how does that happen with the way you dress? I'm surprised you don't have a beehive of suitors around you. And I think it offers a chance for some really elevated flirting that is pretty fun. And if it goes nowhere, you've lost nothing. And you've got a chance to practice your social skills.
Yeah.
But those social skills really come in handy. And again, like I say, within 5 minutes, if you find out she's really not that friendly and she's really not interested in whatever it is you're talking about, to say, well, you have a good night now, and you go on to the next available applicant who's applying for a leading role in the epic film that is your life.
Yeah. And one thing I hear about women all the time with men complaining about them is that they don't let the woman talk and they talk about themselves, and then they don't follow up with a question like to ask her.
Right. So now you're talking about technique, and making small talk is something that gets better with practice. So just pretend for a minute she's a guy. And if some guy asks you, hey, are you enjoying tonight's opera? And you probably, for me, I think intimacy is a process where two individuals who know what's going on ladder up their disclosures at a fairly reciprocal level. So I would start with some sort of vulnerable disclosure, but not so vulnerable, like, wow, I cannot believe tonight's opera. I'm really enjoying this. How about you? So I've already put some skin in the game, and I've told her a little bit about me, and I'm not going on and on about that baritone, though. He really isn't hitting his notes. And, it's something more esoteric or more knowledgeable, but just talking about my aesthetic pleasure at the event, or maybe my displeasure at it. I don't know. I'm not sure this was right to set this Vivaldi opera in Nazi Germany. Just doesn't feel quite right. And for some people, they're going to say, oh, no, it really works for me. And other people are going to say, yeah, I know what you mean. And it doesn't matter, because we each get to have a different point of view. And as we practice these kinds of small talk opportunities, just the pleasure, the joy of simply getting to know another human being and getting to have a conversation about opera. If you're enjoying opera in your life, or motor car racing, or the outdoors, to meet somebody else who shares your enthusiasm is really a pleasure. So it almost doesn't matter, if it's a romantic or sexual opportunity at all, because there's a pleasure in just having the conversation and being able to enjoy that authentically without trying to leverage it or shoehorn it into some kind of romantic, hey, you want to go out, after the opera? If you can just dial it down a little bit, Romeo. I mean, just really enjoy this person for their own sake.
Yeah.
Because we all pick up on that hard sell and the person who's trying to close us. And it's just so much better if it happens organically.
So then how does a number or something like that happen?
Oh, well, I mean, if in the first 2 minutes you're giving her your number, hey, if you want to go out for a drink after this, give me a call, or text me and I'll meet you at the, front door. That's not organic.
Yeah.
That's not natural. That's me pushing my agenda and trying to sell her on what an amazing privilege she's going to have in meeting me and getting a free drink.
But say so what I'm hearing is, so mate selection, one of the first things to do is maybe figure out what you like, where you like to go,
Figuring out who you are.
like,
Yeah. And in terms of mate selection, if I could go back to a bit, kind of pull back the camera to the big picture, ultimately, if it's about mate selection, we're going to want to have build a successful, intimate relationship. And I was joking earlier about pre-gaming with a couple of shots to get up your courage, but pre-gaming is essential to this whole thing in mate selection. Now, you can date and you can flirt at any time in your life, but I really think there's some mission critical accomplishments or developmental goals that need to be reached before I'm building intimacy with my significant other down the road in a future committed relationship. And I have to be a happy person. I'm at the opera because I'm a happy guy who wants more in his life, and I want to enjoy a richer, deeper life experience. And so happiness is part of that. Having friends is part of mate selection, because if I don't have friends, that means she's going to potentially become my everything. And I think having friends is a relief to most of us, because it means the other person isn't going to be counting on us for everything. And also that they're normal. They're not living some kind of hermit-like existence in our society where they don't know anybody and nobody knows them, and they're just so achingly lonely that they're going to glom onto one of us, like that creature in the film Alien. We don't want that. If you're a healthy person, you don't want that. And career. And that's why we all ask, so what do you do for a living? And if, I come from a family with a career criminal for my dad, and my mom was at various times a cocktail waitress. So I don't look down my nose on what anybody is doing for a living, particularly if it's honest work that serves humanity. And I would include cocktailing as one of those jobs. But if I meet a 30-year-old woman and she's working at McDonald's, I'm sure there's a backstory to that. I'd like to know it. But if no, she's always worked at McDonald's, and no, she's not in management, that's probably not someone who's going to be good for me.
But what if she could get you free McDonald's? Free Happy Meals.
They don't do that.
All the toys.
They don't comp.
They don't do that. How do you know this? Have you dated?
No, but I have clients who work at McDonald's. Okay. So of course I know these things. Okay. Don't ask me about the undertaking business. All the stories I could tell you.
But 30 years old, and she's still in the McDonald's.
Or she has no idea what her career is.
What she just wants to do,
She doesn't know who she is. And that doesn't make her a bad person. But it would be, in a case for somebody like you or me, it'd be maybe poaching out of season, because she's really not ready for the kind of relationship I'm looking to establish. Although she might be fine for dating, because if she's funny and just really personable, well, sure, I would want to spend more time with her because that's enjoyable. But again, just because I'm with a pretty woman who likes enjoying our time together as I do, that doesn't mean we're mate material for each other.
So that's like the pre-work that you do. Those are the shots that if you do that, you don't need the shots.
Yeah, exactly. And, social skill development and also having emotional and mental health. So what I'm talking about is before I can go, in my great white hunter outfit to find the appropriate mate, I first need to take care of myself and really develop a life worth living. And I just remind people of that. We've talked about it at length on these podcasts, but if you're not doing that, you're really trying to cheat the game and skip ahead when you really can't do that. You can go ahead and date, and you can go ahead and have fun. You could even fall in love or have sex, but you're kidding yourself if you think you're ready to be in a long-term committed relationship because you're not.
But so many people do it though.
Yes. And that's why my counseling business is a growth industry. There's like so much pain and suffering for those who do that. And sometimes it takes them a brief time to find out, or it takes them 5 or 10 years and 3 or 4 kids, but it's always a disaster. Yeah.
Really? So that's like statistically, it's like if they don't have those things figured out before they get in relationships, the problems that they haven't resolved are then just coming to the surface within the relationship.
Yeah. So you don't find out some of the things, some of the vital information. Like I thought everybody liked to hug and kiss. You don't find out that, oh, my partner's aptitude or interest in affection is vastly different from my own. You naively were forging ahead thinking we're all the same in that one area.
Yeah.
But you didn't really do the research to find out how different humanity can be on some kind of a bell-shaped curve of, say, measurements of affection. And the same is true with one sort of metric after the other, neatness and tidiness, personal hygiene, openness to humble learning and exchange of ideas. There are people out there who are just absolutely anti-intellectual, and there are those of us who can't live without the pleasures of the intellect, the marriage of kindred minds or true minds. I think for me, it just makes no sense. And that's why we are seeing so many articles on the topic of, well, relationships take a lot of work.
Yeah.
They're really hard work. And you see this even in our fiction and television shows and movies. Well, I know relationships take a lot of work. No, they don't. Growing up and becoming an adult takes a lot of work. But if you have 2 successful adults who are compatible and they fall in love because they're mutually attracted and they have their intentional interview kind of figured out, their relationship is actually pretty effortless.
Yeah.
It really is. It's enjoyable every step of the way. There's no sense in hurrying it. They are savoring every day that they spend associated with one another. And it just grows organically out of that. But it's a little bit, I'm a gardener, so if you can forgive me a gardening metaphor, it's like the gardener who really loves flowers and he goes and harvests some seeds from some of the flowers growing along the side of the freeway, only to find out, oh, he harvested them before they were mature seeds. And so none of them are going to germinate and nothing good is going to come out of all that effort. So, and that's a fairly benign metaphor for what is actually a very painful life process.
Yeah.
So mate selection is a specific subtopic of a much larger topic that includes adjacent topics like developing a life worth living, and then mate selection itself. I also have to do an intentional interview. I have to, there's a lot of working parts that are constantly evolving and moving around. So not so complicated. We humans can't understand it, but more complicated than just falling off a log into the arms of your true love.
Yeah. And what about people? What if they're like, I have friends, I'm happy in my life, but I'm working a job that is just working to pay the bills and I'm going to school?
Yeah, but school is your real career because you're training for something. And it's a little bit like somebody like Kevin Costner, who's a little long in the tooth right now, but it wasn't so long ago, I think, that he did remarry. And before he was an actor, he was a carpenter in the LA area. And for years, he worked as a carpenter. So his day job as a carpenter paid the bills so that his career could go forward. And my wife found a fingernail polish out there, and I forget who makes it, but but I'm Really an Actress is the name of the fingernail polish, because there's so many waitresses in the LA area, so many people in service industry who, they're working in a restaurant, let's say, but on their off hours, they're going to acting classes, they're going to auditions, they're really actors. So you might be working, say, anywhere. Maybe you'd be working as a bartender, let's say. But if you're going to school, I would probably guess you're going to school with a goal, and that goal has as its core an idea about your future direction. But probably not going to school to become a better bartender.
Yeah. But is that then, would you say those people can they get into romances? And I mean, anyone can do anything, but would you suggest that they get, that they're ready for is that like work?
Boy, I can see I'm making this as clear as mud, aren't I? So I like I said, you could be 12 years old and enjoying a romance. That doesn't mean you're ready for a romance.
So they're not ready. So Kevin Costner maybe at a carpenter while he's still going to school isn't ready because he still hasn't figured out.
Well, readiness isn't, like so many things in life, isn't a binary where I'm ready or I'm not ready. It's to what degree am I ready? And a 12-year-old is ready because he has the heart for it. He's got the lips for kissing, and he is ready, willing, and able to hold hands, walking down the hallway.
Yeah.
So
I'm ready, ladies.
Here it is. But he's not ready for a successful adult relationship.
Yeah.
Nor is a 15-year-old, and I think most 18-year-olds are not ready for something like that. Although historically, the human race has been, characterized by people getting together at super young ages, depending on the lifespan of their society, of the individuals in their society, and nor we have no guarantee though. Age is not the metric. Because there are plenty of 40-year-olds out there who are not ready to be in an intimate relationship.
Yeah.
And
you looking at me at that one?
No, I knew you were thinking that, but I wasn't thinking of you. I was thinking of both men and women I've met over the years who, let's say, they're lacking mental and emotional stability.
Yeah. So
if she is still angry at her ex-husband and kind of lumps all men into that group of disgusting males, then she's probably not really ready to be in a sane relationship that is truly intimate. And by intimate, I hope the listeners are understanding, we don't mean having sex necessarily. We mean able to share her life safely with another human being.
Yeah.
So and the same is true of the 40-year-old surgeon who's brilliant and so good at school, and he just sucks at interpersonal relationships because his emotional IQ is that of a 9-year-old.
Yeah.
So there you are. You can't go by occupation, you can't go by career, but nevertheless, we want to see somebody with a career, because having a career means you do know something about yourself. But if you upon getting to know that person, if you find out, and they hate their career, and the only reason they're a doctor is because their parents said they would never pay for his college unless he became a doctor.
Yeah.
And I've met doctors like that. Well, yeah, that's not really the right career for them. They have a career they're trapped in.
Yeah.
For the moment.
Yeah, you don't want that.
So it's complicated, right?
Yeah,
and
it is.
It's hard to develop rules about this, but I think if you can just kind of let go of the neediness and just think it through, anyone listening to this would be able to see and understand and even begin practicing this more mindful approach to mate selection.
Well, guys say it too. They're like, well, what am I going to offer this woman? Or
what
am I
would
going to offer a partner? And
what I see is men saying, well, no, she's too pretty for me. What would I have to offer her?
Yeah. And
so my clients, men and women, are often guilty because they are lacking some emotional health and sometimes mental health. They compensate by aiming low.
Yeah.
So yeah, if I could find some really nicely messed up meth addict, somebody with a lot of body metal and ink on her arms, then yeah, I think we have something in common.
Yeah.
And especially if she's like half drunk.
Yeah.
So those guys end up quite often, and those women end up with those people who are really not ready. But they're so achingly lonely that it just feels so wonderful in the moment.
Yeah.
To connect a little bit with someone.
Yeah.
But it's not a successful long-term strategy.
Yeah. So yeah, to wrap up mate selection, lots to it. And I would say kind of just a few tips. Create a life worth living. That's one thing to work on. But do they have to have it complete? I think
absolutely not. You can be in process.
Yeah. Being in process. Yeah. That's the thing. So creating and working towards it. Creating a life worth living, that then allows you to know yourself and get all those pre-shots sort of figured out. You feel more confident and secure within yourself. Then location, like knowing where you want to go, where you want to be to meet somebody. And then when you do meet that somebody, not being super needy to it all, where you're just pouncing on the person, having an organic conversation. And then from there, if it does lead to further dates, having an intentional interview where you're being honest, vulnerable, asking the right questions, and really being intentional about selecting a partner that you could create a safe, intimate, loving relationship with.
Yeah, and it's going to be somewhat paradoxical, I suppose. But I think it was Fritz Perls who said that if I can't live without her, then I can't live with her. And he was speaking to that overwhelming amount of neediness.
Yeah.
So if I can't date without feeling comfortable walking away with, say, mild disappointment, but I'm not destroyed because I lost, my girlfriend. If you're not there yet, then you're really not ready for doing a good job of mate selection.
Yeah. You heard it from Steve. Great. So we're going to wrap up there. And to end, we have a listener question. And if you have a question for Steve, you could visit stevening.com and fill out the contact form. This week's question. Hi, Steve. My husband has been on an antidepressant for over 2 years. He still seems stressed and unhappy to me, but he says the medication helps. The medication affects him sexually, so he has been avoiding intimacy. He's now avoiding affection in general because cuddling is arousing for me. He will not discuss it, and he gets mad if I bring up therapy. What can I do to help him see this is affecting me in a very negative way?
Well, I think sometimes putting a .38 caliber revolver to the temple and saying you're going to therapy, that can be effective. But if you don't love him enough to do that, then I think. I suppose a little bit of information might help. So psychotherapy sometimes includes the use of medication. And I am neither a big fan of nor against pharmaceuticals, because I do think there are some people who really need them. And then there is also the case of a lot of people using antidepressants or anti-anxiety medication to lower their pain, but they are not really solving the problems that are afflicting them in their life. So as a therapist, what I note is there are people who are so disabled by their depression, let's say in this case, and that they can't even remember what we talked about in the session by the time they get out into the parking lot and back into their car to go home. Those people need some medicine. And I think that's really fair. But they also need psychotherapy, because if you've gotten yourself into a position in your life where you are depressed, you've really made some decisions along the way that contributed to your getting into that psychopathology. So of course he needs psychotherapy. But then there becomes all the resistance to, I have clients who say, well, I don't want to get on drugs. I'm never going to take drugs, even though they've had a 20-year history of, say, meth abuse. They don't want to, now that they're clean, they don't want to take any antidepressants. It is also true in my experience that every single man I've ever talked to who's on antidepressants has sexual side effects, and which is okay for a short term. And I think therapy should be pretty effective, because the treatment plans for depression are very effective, and they can be accomplished in a very speedy manner. We're not talking a year. So I think relief is possible very quickly.
Treatment, just straight up talking to you and like,
well, yeah, I mean, me specifically, of course. That's we're trying to drive everybody in America to my office. No, there are just so many wonderful treatments for depression out there, and I think finding a good therapist who's really familiar, and I'm hoping the consumers would know enough to say, so what do you think is my treatment plan? After a session or two where they've taken a history and given you your diagnosis, and if those things aren't happening, then you're probably with the wrong therapist. So, let the buyer beware, and consumers need to know what they're getting into. So talking to therapists, interviewing therapists, getting some referrals, I think all of that contributes to success. But let's say this is back to her question, though. I do understand that he's avoidant of intercourse. He's not avoidant of intimacy. He is avoidant of intercourse, but to find a way to talk about this, I think, is going to be her best bet. And even for her to begin her own journey in therapy, to find a therapist that she can really work with. Generally speaking, men want to take care of their wives, and for her therapist to call him up and say, Mr. Jones, Mrs. Jones and I have reached a point in her therapy where she really needs you to make any progress. Would you be willing to come in and help her? Very few husbands are going to say, I'm not going to do that. They're going to, most men will be glad to come in to help her. And that's legit, because he would be helping her by helping himself. And once he's broken the ice and found a reasonable, plausible excuse that doesn't feel emasculating to walk into a psychotherapist's office just for him, when he can go in to rescue the little lady, then he finds out he's getting some benefit out of it too, and he's working toward a goal, and it's really making sense to him. I think that's a way to approach this. But it's a thinking error for any of us to think, oh, all I have to do is take a pill like this, and that will cure all the things that are related to my psychopathology. That just doesn't happen. It does provide relief, and it's wonderful for those for whom the pills work, but it's not the ultimate answer, right? So there's going to have to be some psychotherapy. There's going to have to be a little trickery involved. So a little bit of persuasion, perhaps, to get him in there. But once in there, I think a competent therapist could make it clear that this is really worth his time. And it's not going. Nobody charges extra for another person in the room. So that would be my advice.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you for that. And thank you for the question. And that wraps up today's episode. Thank you all for listening, and we'll catch you all next week.
Wow, that was pretty fast. You're just really anxious to get rid of those people. You got to go somewhere? Do you have a date after this? What's going on?
I got to go to the opera, and I got to start putting this stuff into practice.
Talk to you later.